am excited to speak with you all today. I'm going to be talking about accessibility. I am primarily an Android engineer, but you can get, I made it as abstract enough that if you're doing iOS, web, whatever you're working on, you should get something from this as well. And like Sierra said, I am a mobile engineer. I'm working right now at Square, as well as doing some books and tutorials and stuff with rearwindowlift.com. And with that, let's get started. Let's start talking about accessibility. All of these resources will be, that I mentioned in the talk, I will share in a link at the end, so don't worry about if you miss something. You can go back to the slides. All right, and one other thing, because it's sometimes hard to stay engaged during a web talk, it can get kind of boring, feeling like you're watching a YouTube video. I'm gonna try to make this a little bit more interactive. If you want to go to menti.com and type in this code 6095094, you don't need to create an account or anything. You just go and type in the code and you'll be in our room. We're going to create a word cloud together. So anywhere within the talk, if you have like something that sticks out, a keyword, an idea, go ahead and type it in. You can add as many things as you want. And at the end, we'll see what we create together. Bonus points if you get this in the chat. It's hard for me to do that while I am presenting. It's also in tiny little print at the bottom of the slides. When you're there, go ahead and just put in any words. What do you think about when you think about accessibility? And as you type stuff in, it will show up here. Again, at the top here, it has the website, menti.com, and the code 6095094. And I'll come back to this every once in a while. I don't need to be on the screen for you to add stuff. You can add it at any time. So while you're doing that, I'm going to start talking about what is accessibility. And really, it's a lot of things. In short, it's a way to make your app available to use by more people. And more broadly, not even apps, but anything in the world. I saw an article the other day about furniture that's more accessible for people with vision impairments. It has very contrasted edges with the colors. An app is accessible if anyone can use it independently without the assistance from another person. This is largely thought about when it comes to supporting people with disabilities, maybe with vision, hearing, or motor disabilities, as well as cognitive and mental health disorders. So it covers a broad range of things. And next is, well, why should you care? And there are a lot of reasons for this, from product to personal to legal, and we'll go over some of them here. For one, and one that we're going to kind of focus on today, is in general, it just makes a better product. It makes a better experience for everyone when you make your app accessible. It helps people who do have those vision impairments or motor disabilities. It also helps people with temporary disabilities, such as if they're driving or they have a broken wrist or their eyes are dilated, and other everyday things. It also just has some nice to haves for people, such as keyboard navigation, if you've ever hit escape to close a modal, or enter to submit a form, or tab to advance to the next form field. It gives you captions on videos if either you're maybe in public and you don't want to play a video out loud, or you just prefer using captions on videos. It increases customization. So if you want darker light mode, different audio settings. Your phone vibrating when it rings is also an accessibility thing. It also just creates more consistent and predictable layouts. So in general, these are things that make your app more accessible for people who need them, but also just make it a nice experience for everyone who uses your app. By creating an accessible app, you also reach a wider audience. People with disabilities represent one of the largest minority groups. According to the CDC, 1 in 4 adults in the US have some type of disability. And by catering to this group, you have access to a larger user base. So you have more potential customers, more potential users for your app, for your product. Creating apps for accessibility does mean working within constraints, but constraints can help drive innovation. Maybe you can't fit as much content on the screen, so you have to be creative and think about different ways that you can present things or organize your navigation. It means you have to really think about what's important and where things are located. And again, that makes it a better experience for everyone instead of maybe dumping everything on a page, just going with the first design that you think of. It can be more intentional, more thought out, and you can maybe think of something new that you wouldn't have thought of before. This is an important one. I find it kind of boring personally, but it's a very important one. The reality is there can be lawsuits against your app or your company because your app isn't accessible. According to the Americans with Disabilities Act, you have to also have your app accessible. And so it's nice to just support those accessibility guidelines before there's a lawsuit. That sounds a lot cheaper and a lot easier. And then finally, and this one is my favorite reasons, is because it's just the right thing to do. We want to be in an inclusive society that takes care of our neighbors. Imagine being maybe stuck at home because you have a new puppy that you cannot take your eyes off of because they will just tear the place apart, but you're really hungry and you want to order some food. You want that food ordering app to be accessible to you. You don't want to go to order some food and be like, well, I can't tell where the buttons are, or I'm not sure which step is next. You want to make that clear for everyone so they can get some tasty grub while taking care of their adorable but chaotic new puppy. All right, so here's a question time. This is a prompt to add some thoughts to your word cloud. So the question is, how can you test for accessibility improvements? So if you add your ideas here, they will show up. I already see some things that show up already, like for example, you can use the screen reader to test things out. Accessibility scanner. You can look at color blindness scanners. There's a whole bunch of things to do, and we're going to keep looking at more of them in the next slides. So there's accessibility tools that you need to know about first, and these are some modified ways that people can consume our apps. For example, there's screen readers like TalkBack on Android and VoiceOver on iOS. And this is one way that people consume apps. It allows users to traverse the screen, sometimes without touch, and understand what's on the screen, maybe without sight. Some familiar ways to think about this might be using an app on a TV, using the next and select buttons. Another might be using your phone via the Assistant or Siri or voice access. Other people change the display and font size to make it bigger, to make it easier for some people to see. And then there's also some color corrections that help people with color blindness or other vision impairments. So different ways people can use your app and use accessibility tools to enhance their experience. So how can you test it? And there's a level of different ways. There's manual user testing. This is the most reliable and comprehensive. Manual testing would be using these accessibility services on your own, seeing what it's like to use your app using TalkBack or with the font bumped way up. And you'll uncover issues by yourself with that, being like, well, that was weird. That didn't really make sense. And then user testing is also really great. These are people who use these services day to day that can help out. And you can see how they use your app, and you can learn a lot from that. Some other ways to do it is there are automatic accessibility scanners, there's accessibility inspector, acts as another app. And while these don't catch everything, they're a really good way to like catch like the baseline, some of the low-hanging fruit for you to fix. And I'll show an example in a moment. There's also automated tests for at least Android, I'm not sure on iOS. You can hook in accessibility checks right into your existing Espresso UI tests. So you can plug that in as your existing tests are running. It will run some accessibility checks for you to catch some things, some similar things to the scanners. And then there are also Lint Checks. This catches a smaller subset of things. It's stuff that like your code analysis can check. So you have a linter right when you're writing code, be like, oh, I have a little notification that I forgot to add a content description. Let me do that. And that's nice because it's right there in the code that you're in. This is an example of one of the scanner apps. This is the accessibility scanner by Google. So once you install it, you can scan your app. It will put little boxes around different areas that could have improvements. These are similar areas that are brought up by the Espresso checks. And in this image, they're orange and you can click on it and it'll give you more information, what it thinks it's wrong, why. For this arrow, it says, oh, this arrow is 24 by 24 dp, but we want it to be at least 48 dp. And it has other suggestions and details there that can help guide you to solve the issue. First, discover it if it's an issue, and then help you solve the issue. So now you know kind of how you can discover the issues. Let's dig into some specific guidelines. We're going to be going through the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, specifically 2.1. They just started revealing some stuff from 3.0, so I'm excited to get into that. But we don't have time to go over everything. We will hit some of the things that you're most likely to run into. So kind of think of this like a sample platter. The goal is that when you're making a product decision, you can think back and remember, I think there was an accessibility argument for that. Let me remind myself before deciding. So with that, let's look into some of the categories there. WCAG uses 4 categories to organize the guidelines: perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. And we'll describe what these dimensions are and then dig a little deeper into how you can support them. So to start off, we have perceivable. And this requires thinking about ways people can consume content. So can everything on your screen be read with a screen reader? If there's an audio cue, is there another way to receive the cue? So here is another question. What's a way people can perceive your app? And with that, we'll also go back to the cloud. Some examples might be audio. They can listen to your app. A site, if they're looking at the screen, colors, touch, shape, haptic feedback. Let's see what else is on here. It's so hard to like watch it while it's moving. Alt text is important for the screen readers, having different text sizes, so many different ways. We will keep adding to this as we go through some ways that you can make your app more perceivable, no matter how people are perceiving it. And one is to use labeling. The purpose of this one is mainly for people using screen readers. And this is especially for images and buttons without readable text. So if you don't have a label for, say, an image button, maybe it's meant to be a pencil that's like an edit button. The screen reader would say something like unlabeled button, and the user doesn't know what this button is for. So you need to add a label for it so that the user knows what it is. The user might not perceive what the button is supposed to do in that case, unless you add that label. One exception is if the image doesn't need to be perceived to operate your app, such as if it's a decoration, maybe a gradient or a divider, or plenty of other things. In that case, you need to make sure that you set it up so that the screen reader knows that it can skip it. Not everyone can watch videos or listen to audio. If you have an onboarding tutorial video, do you have text that goes with it, or maybe captions? Or if your app uses audio cues, is there another way to access those cues? Imagine downloading a new app and not being able to get past onboarding because you can't access the instructions in a way that you can perceive. It also helps if you download an app and you don't want to watch the onboarding video because there's a sleeping child next to you that you don't want to wake up. They just fell asleep. Having an alternative to watching that video or listening to these onboarding instructions are great for everyone, not just people who can't maybe watch the video or listen to the instructions because of impairments. And then also around time-based media such as videos and audio and animations is you want to allow skipping it or rewinding it. And this is for a variety of reasons. The movement of a video or animation can cause nausea for some. It can also cause others anxiety if they feel they missed something and can't go back, or if they feel there's limited time to absorb some bit of information. Then reminding is really great in that case. People with motor or cognitive disabilities might just need a little bit more time, so try not to time constrain them. And then motion and animation can be distracting for some and detract from what you're trying to communicate. It also helps if you download an app and you missed the onboarding video because you have an awake and very loud child next to you. All right, another way to make your app more perceivable is to pay attention to the relationship and ordering of things. Most screen readers will traverse the screen from the top start of the screen to the bottom end. Top also happens to be the way most humans consume content. You also kind of want to group things together that should be read at the same time, such as a label and a value. This not only helps people who use screen readers, but also if you want to build your app for Chromebook or Mac OS or TV. In the image here, we have a screenshot of the Play Store. Around the previously installed apps heading, there's a green box. It grouped together, it reads all together, previously installed apps, give one a go, and then something like double click to activate. If these were not grouped together by the developer, you'd have to read previously installed apps, then go to the next view, give one a go, then go to the next view, and then click on the arrow and go. By having it all grouped, it logically should all be together. It's all one thing to read, all one action. So try to group things where it makes sense. All right, if you're trying to communicate something to your user, don't rely only on visual or audio cues to convey information. Don't only rely on shape, color, size, visual location, orientation, or sound, because these things might not be perceivable for the user. An example might be when an error pops up on the screen. Does someone who's using a screen reader know that there's a new error? Or if you say, touch the green circle, but they can't see green, how do they know which circle to tap? And this helps anyone who might have looked away from their phone for a moment and missed a transition or an instruction or other things. It helps to make what you're trying to communicate a lot more clear. This is one that was relatively new to me, is that you should allow both portrait and landscape mode in your app. And there are some exceptions, such as maybe for mobile games, but you should support both where you can. Imagine having low mobility and having your screen on a mount on your wheelchair. It's not easy, or in some cases even possible, to change the orientation of the device in order to just use a specific app you want to use. It's also helpful for others who might feel more comfortable using their phone in a specific orientation, such as maybe using it with one hand, or if it's on a car mount in the car. A mention of color again. Make sure that your colors have adequate contrast. So something with a high contrast would be like black text on a white background. Low contrast would be like yellow text on a white background. And there's ways to calculate the contrast. There's plenty of online calculators for this. But any text that needs to be distinguishable needs to have a contrast of 7:1 for most text and 4.5:1 for large text. Exceptions include things like decorations or logos. And there are similar contrast rules for other controls like buttons that need to be perceivable. I like to use digital well-being to make my phone grayscale after a certain time at night. And if an app doesn't have adequate color contrast, it makes it hard for me to use at night. It kind of stimulates color blindness or other vision impairments. Along with color, like I mentioned before, it shouldn't be the only way you communicate something. For example, don't always only use red and green for success or failure. You should also use things like icons or text in the case that the colors aren't perceptible. Again, I have an app that uses color as one way to show if an answer is right or wrong. And sometimes this app is harder to use after my phone becomes grayscale if the color is the only thing that's showing me that information. Again, people can bump up the font size in their app. If someone has the font size bumped way up, you should still be able to use your app like normal. As we all age and our vision deteriorates, we'll all be thankful for this one. One of the easiest ways to violate this is if you assume a text view will always be under a certain width or height. But then when you bump the text size up, it might be cut off. In the case when text views are next to each other, on Android, you can use constraint layout flows to help bump a view to the next line. That's a fun tip that I learned. When you do have text views, consider, can it go on to multiple lines? If I ellipsize it, is it okay if people don't get the full text? Here is a side-by-side again of the Google Play Store. The left is the normal default size, and on the right it is bumped up. For the recommended for you, or recommended for ... in the case of the scaled text size, it's truncated. You can't see the full message. Maybe that's intentional, maybe not, but when you're creating your app, make sure you support this and it behaves the way you want it to, if you want it to be ellipsized or wrap to the next line. All right, the next one is operable. And this kind of goes along with, can you navigate and perform actions, whether you're tapping with your finger on your touchscreen, using a keyboard or talkback. Are the buttons big enough to press? So the next question is, what is a way people can operate your app? So one answer you can put is by tapping the touch screen, by touch. There's also gestures. People can use their voice. There's audio for using it. There are switches. Yes, I see that as well. Using the screen reader. There's so many different ways that people can use the app, the keyboard, Braille keyboard, so many different ways. So you want to make sure that everyone's able to operate the app, perform the actions that they came to your app to use. So first is navigation. One of the best ways to understand how your navigation is to try it out yourself or to watch someone try it out. As you walk through the screen, can you reach everything that's on it? Does it make logical sense? Does the order make sense? An example of something that might not make logical sense is to have a submit button at the top of a page rather than the end of a form. So you get to the end of the form and you're like, well, how do I submit it now? I'm at the bottom. Are things grouped in a way that makes sense? Or is something way too repetitive? If the user reaches a button on the screen, is it clear what action it performs? And then more than just for the screen reader, it can cause anxiety for a user if they just don't know what will happen when they press a button. So providing that clarity helps people navigate and use your app. And then finally, this is another case that would make it possible to build your app for desktop or TV. When things are traversed in a logical order, it's a lot easier to operate it with maybe a remote or a keyboard if that's just what you want to do. And then we're going to go back to timed things again. And again, this applies for many reasons. You want to give users enough time to complete a task, even if it's not a video or something. If something is showing or hiding, someone who is slower at consuming information might miss it. And this could be because of a disability or simply because of an outside distraction. And then there's a similar argument for those with motor restrictions who might need more time. It's also better for users with anxiety to not have these time limits to contribute to any anxious feelings. And again, there's exceptions for this one. For example, if something goes out of stock or it's a time-based game, yeah, you kind of have to do some time restrictions there. You can't sell something that's now out of stock, even though it was in stock earlier. But when you can provide adjustable timing or extending timing or just not restricting timing at all, that's something you should do. And then another thing to note around timing is that you should avoid anything that's flashing. And this is both because of a hazard for seizures and because things are just kind of harder to perceive when they're flashing, whether because it's annoying or because it's harder to read. When you have things like gestures, like maybe pinching to zoom in and out or a slider, in case someone isn't able to perform that gesture, such as a pinch, for one reason or another, there should be another way to accomplish the task using one finger. An idea for zooming, an additional way to do that might be like a slider, or buttons to tap bigger and smaller. And for single touch actions, there should be a way to back out or undo. This might simply be if you move your finger off the button before you lift it up, the action isn't performed, and this is the default for most system buttons, or having an undo or back button. These options are really good for everyone, especially in the case for one-handed use. There's been plenty of times I know where like my elbow bumps something and I hit something that I didn't mean to and I want to undo it. It's just so much nicer if I have that option. All right, touch targets. Have you ever visited a website or even an app on your phone and struggled to click on a link or a button that's just too small? The recommended size for Android is 48 by 48 for anything clickable or interactable. And it's a similar guideline for iOS and web. So you want your links, your buttons to be large enough to tap. And an added bonus for this is it also makes the actions in your app more clear. If you're like, oh, this is clearly a button, it is button sized and not this tiny little thing in the corner. It just makes things clearer for everyone. All right, I know we've only gone through 2 of the 4 categories for the guidelines. Don't worry, the next 2 are shorter. And the next one is understandable. Not only can the content be perceived, not only can you operate it, but can you just understand it? You can see an icon and yeah, I can perceive it, I can see it fine, but I don't know what it means. Can you understand it? This includes things like limiting abbreviations and idioms. Is it clear why something errored? Is everything communicated effectively? All of these things. One way to do this is through internationalization and localization, which can be a whole talk in itself. And that's part of this, but it's not the only way to make your app more understandable. That is a way to make it more understandable by people who speak different languages, who are in other parts of the world. There's other things you can do too. You can also avoid hard to read words and idioms, which are often culturally specific and sometimes just hard to understand. Avoiding long blocks of text improve the experience for everyone, because like, who reads it anyway, unless you're going in wanting to read a blog post. And it makes it a better experience for users with autism. You want your content to be easily digestible. And then how many times have you run into an abbreviation you didn't know and you felt old or awkward because you had to look it up? Don't do that to your users. Avoid abbreviations if you can, and if you do have abbreviations, make sure you provide explanations for them. And then the same can also go for emojis and icons. Symbols don't always mean the same thing to everyone, so if you can make them more clear, awesome. Try to be as intentional as possible when you're using them. And then on the flip side, pairing icons with text can help improve understandability. Some people comprehend words better, and some images are easier. So just keep that in mind when you're deciding how to create your app and convey that information. You want things to be consistent for everyone as well. Are you using send or submit throughout your app? It also pays to have consistent layout and ordering throughout the app. It makes the app so much easier to navigate for everyone. And this is especially true for people using screen readers and users with autism, and also if people just get distracted. Finally, you don't want the context of where you are in the app to change unless an action is performed to cause that change, such as pressing an exit button. This brings down the confusion of, oh, wait, where am I and how did I get here? Just changing a setting, if it's not clear that it's gonna close the app, maybe you don't clear the screen. A maybe mini version of this would be if you click it into an input field and the hint or label goes away. What if the user gets pulled away and then they come back, it's unclear to them what they're supposed to type in. They forget what the hint is, they can't see the label anymore, they don't know what the field is for. All right, and then finally, robust. This is making sure that the app can be used through a variety of different ways, whether it's screen readers or looking at the screen or braille back, all these different things. If you're using native components, this is largely taken care of for you, so we won't spend too much extra time on it. This is something to look into if you have highly customizable and interactive views, such as if you're drawing directly on a canvas. Make sure your custom view is hooked into the accessibility services correctly in this case. One note that I will put here is that the more configurable you make your app, the more accessible it will be it for color schemes, audio settings, animations, and more. Everyone, regardless of ability, has different needs and preferences. If you let others use the app in a way that's best for them, it will mean a more quality product. And in the end, my wish for you is to build quality apps because you care about having a quality app, and build accessible apps for the caring world you want to live in. I want to thank you all for listening. I'm here for questions as long as we have this call open. I'm also available online after that. You can find me on Twitter at @TTGonda. I'm also on LinkedIn if that's more your things. The slides and all my resources can be found on my website, victoriagonda.com. After I'm done screen sharing and everything, I'll post that in the chat as well. And with that, I will give you one last question to think about and add to our word cloud. And that is, what things can you remember to look for to keep your app accessible? And I'll pull up the word cloud in a moment so that we can see everyone's answers to all of the questions, everyone's thoughts about the talk. I wanted to share that I just released a book. If you want to learn more about accessibility, specifically on Android, I'll provide a link to the full URL, but you can also find it by going to raywerdelich.com/books. My resources are at victoriagonda.com/talks. You can see these slides both in PDF form as well as in just plain Markdown, all of the resources for the talk, as well as this recording I'll post there too when it's ready. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Victoria. If anyone has any questions and want to post it in the chat or submit via Q&A, we have a few minutes for that. I had a really specific question of something you said and I didn't catch it. When you were talking about text and text sizes, you said using constraint layout, you can use something flows, I think?
Yes.
What is that? I need to know.
Absolutely. So with constraint layout, you can have like your chains of constraints. You have a text view and then your next text view and a button or whatever, and you have them chained horizontally. If you create a flow, so it's like constraint layout flow, should have it show up when you Google it. It creates a chain so that like if it doesn't all fit horizontally, you can do it vertically too. Like the end of the chain will just wrap to the next line. So similar to the way text will wrap to the next line, your views will wrap to the next line if it doesn't fit horizontally. And there's different configurations for that if you want things centered or to the left or evenly spaced or whatever. But I found it really handy for like, well, on most screens, this text will be next to this text. But if the initial text is like way too long, I want the second text to bump down to the next line.
Perfect. Thank you. I just wrote that down. I'm going to look that up. I think I ran into that problem with localization and trying to figure out how to make it look good in all the different languages.
Yeah.
I think that will be useful.
That is a challenge. All right, and I just dropped that link with those resources in the chat. I don't have the book on there yet, but I'll do that right after this talk.
Well, if no one has any questions, because you did such a good job covering that topic.
Thank you.
So informative. And I really like those word clouds. I thought that was so fun. We can wrap up for the night. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. Thank you, Victoria, for being here and sharing your wealth of knowledge. I'm really excited for your book. And other than that, we'll see you guys next month.
Thank you.
Thank you.